Coogs house. All right, so the Houston Cougars fall 41-0 to Kansas State and get shut out for the first time since 2000. How many listeners are younger than that right now?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan, or just a hater who couldn't sit by, or someone who had nothing else to do on Saturday Night Live. I guess that one intended to be a show reference there. As we are doing Cougars After Dark Live, after all the things have ended on Saturday, be sure to subscribe down below that we can lay us on the Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day, or I guess in this case, maybe your last listen. I don't know what other listens you got after 10 o'clock at night. Thank you all again. Remember, we're doing giveaway of 250 subscribers. It is currently at 1660. That means the next one is 1750. So hit subscribe. Let's get there, like, count on the episodes to let us know you are in the contest. If you are younger than 23 years old, tell us how much younger, because it's been 23 years since Houston got shut out. If you were cognizant of Houston Cougar football when the last time they got shut out back in 2000 was, tell us where you were back in the day. Now, we are going to talk some about the football game. I've got a couple segments planned to talk about that because it's, I think, the most front of mind, even though it was earlier in the day. Football will always be front of mind, but it's also, I think, even as whatever your expectations were, I think it was the lowest of those, and I think it also probably might have been the biggest shock to the system in a lot of ways. We'll talk about that for a couple segments, but I do want to wrap and end on a high note, and that is the basketball program. They had an exhibition game today against UNC Pembroke, which is important to our program for a number of ways. Let's get into it. I don't know. Let's talk about this football game. Houston was shut out 41-0. It was the first time since 2000. That was the 48-0 game against Texas, UT Austin. It was Dana's first shutout I have since 2013. I think he said in the postgame presser since 2014. In 2013, he got shut out by Maryland, 37-0. So it's important to note that, I think, because he is supposed to be an offensive guy. You would think that he could score some points. Lowest individual passing yardage since 9 years ago. The Greg Ward played a swamp game, or it was a crazy raining game. Didn't have that many passing yards today. Individually, Donovan Smith had 88 passing yards. They had 3 drives of negative yardage. No drive was more than 32 yards. And a drive of 0 yards. So 4 drives for 0 or less yards. Just an abysmal day for a football game. Now, this one made me laugh. Raposo, am I saying that correctly? Yeah, Raposo. I can't read that from here, but said that it looked like TCU versus Georgia. That was fine and dandy. I think the thing that I'm feeling about this football game, that I think a lot of people I'm saying are chiming in as well, is Kansas State's a very good football team. Big 12 champion a year ago. I feel, after watching them play throughout the week to get ready for this game and watching this game, fairly confident that they have a real shot at repeating that this year, right? They lost a end of the game chaos with a crazy long field goal to Missouri. They lost a weird game because the Big 12 was weird earlier. If they beat Texas next weekend, there's no reason to me that they don't win the Big 12 again. Kansas State's very, very good, right? Very, very good. I'm not necessarily upset that we got one in the loss column. I'm upset with the way it looked. I'm upset with the way it got there. I'm upset with how the game played out, because, frankly, it was a chance to show some guts on the road, to kind of build off the momentum you had in the Texas game and move forward and continue to build this program forward. And, frankly, just putting up some touchdowns, even if it was after you got hit in the mouth, after you were down 21-0 or whatever, just finding some momentum while all the starters were on the field, or even in this game, I guess, once they were down to the third string quarterback, would have been kind of nice. Now, statistically, we point out Donovan Smith had his I'll comfortably say worst game in a Houston Cougar uniform. I didn't watch every game of his at Tech, obviously. Just not his best day. 88 yards, did throw a pick, no touchdowns, 13 of 28. I'm not great at math. That's less than 50% completions. On the ground, Parker Jenkins had 56 yards on 12 carries. That's just over 4.5 yards per carry. It's not terrible. I think the interesting thing is he had like a couple of big runs, like a 10-yard here and a 17 there, and then it felt like he got nothing after that. We did get to see Uyela, and he was backup quarterback looking when he was out there. Receivers didn't help with drop balls. Quarterbacks didn't help with overthrown balls. We have a Kansas State fan chiming in, with actually segmenting me very nicely, saying that he was there today and it was very cold. I wonder how much that affected those Texas boys. I think the other thing to this Kansas State pod tuning in here is, truthfully, Houston has relied heavily. While we got a new offensive line coach, and while we wanted to build in the run game, I love Parker Jenkins as a running back. When Houston's been rolling, it's because they've been passing the football well, and they were clearly impacted in the pass game. I mean, there were several plays. I made a joke on Twitter that one of Donovan Smith's throws to Sam Brown's sideline was so high in the air, I don't think Wembanyama could have caught it, the center for the Spurs from France, right? Like I don't think that the things were sinking and clicking. I think the weather absolutely has something to do with that. And this is all momentum reading, cliche kind of stuff, but I will say I was hoping to build off of Texas momentum. I was hoping to say, you know what, after that first quarter, you got hit in the mouth by Texas, you built it back up, you came out fine, things went rolling, things were good, right? Frankly, you feel kind of cheated out of the end of that game. That's all fine and dandy and all true. But also, what I think looks like actually happened is they had an emotional game with a Hail Mary win where they frankly thought they'd lost and blown it to West Virginia. Then they had an emotional game against a, 30 years ago, we'd call it a rival because of the old Southwest Conference days with Texas. Field cheated into that one, frankly, poured everything into that, had a crazy atmosphere in Houston. That was awesome atmosphere, all that kind of stuff, right? And then to turn around and then a week later play your first out-of-state game of the season, only your second or so true road game of the season. Big 12 champ, coming off Big 12 championship, 11 a.m. kick. It didn't end up raining and getting muddy and all that, but the weather was supposed to be terrible and it ended up being pretty cold. All those things factored in. It felt like to kind of have this ultimate energy letdown where I was hoping to build on things, right? And I guess that I don't mean that to like excuse things. I feel like I'm just trying to explain like that's what it looked like happened out there. Now, I don't have the analytics in front of me. Those took it and calculated. People were smarter than me with big fancy calculators. But I do think on the whole, if you look at this, it did not look like there was a whole lot of energy from the guys on the field. And two of the handful of guys you'd look for that energy were notably not there. You had Nelson Caesar. Apparently, we found in the post game had some sort of sounds somewhat minor, but he didn't even make the trip out injury on Tuesday's practice. Nelson Caesar obviously leads the team in sacks, this big anytime energy guy, and frankly, a leader on this football team. He was not able to even make the trip, let alone help out on the football field today. Joseph Manjack, we found out, still in the concussion protocol after the, I'll say it, dirty hit he took last week in the Texas game. So obviously that hurts. He's been a fairly consistent wideout. He also, seems to be a wideout that makes a energy type of play each week, even in weeks that things don't go our way, right? So those kinds of things obviously hurt Houston a lot. And while I could come up with a bunch of different, they should have done this, they should have done that, like energy and momentum, those things are also like not necessarily tangible, but also very, very real. Now I want to talk about more tangible things that did happen in this game in a second. But we do need to talk about this. Felt like it was near a football game because it did not feel like one of the two teams showed up to play. We do need to talk about something that is near beer, and that is Athletic Brewing, because Athletic Brewing is your number one spot to go to for non-alcoholic brews, and you use code LOCKEDON for 15% off your first order. Now, I wouldn't have drank this up there today, although maybe to stay warm, I would have had like a stout or something. I really love the Athletic Brewing's non-alcoholic sour when it's a hot Texas day. put that in the fridge, put it in the freezer for a hot second, and then take it out, crack it open. It's nice and crisp and cool. Really refreshing on a hot Texas day. And you can get 15% off your first order at athleticbrewing.com using code LOCKED ON to change the game up with a near beer. You can have as many as you want. You can take them to the park and take them to your kids' game. You do whatever you want with these things. They're tremendous and a ton of fun. And they taste just like alcoholic beer themselves. They have all kinds of different contests they want. They place ahead of actual craft beers and breweries. Check out athleticbrewing.com. Use code LOCKED ON for 15% off your first order. Now, I have to say, when I look at others, I said I don't have the analytics. I'm looking at stats, I'm looking at tangible things that happened. I said coming into the week that Houston had to find some way to keep Kansas State away from running behind the left guard. Left guard had a highlight play. I had several today, really. Cooper Beebe. But Houston had trouble stopping the run in all spots of the football field. In the first quarter and a half, it felt like Kansas State was going to be running off tackle on both tackles all game long. Now, I thought Houston looked like they sold out to stop the running in between the B gaps and thus left themselves vulnerable off the tackles. But the interesting thing to me is schematically, if they're going to play this 3-3-5 they switched to last week for the rest of the season, and they might. I think it says a lot about your defense if you switch defensive schemes up midseason. But, in doing that, you shouldn't be giving up off tackles. You have a head-up player on the offensive tackle, maybe an inside gap, but still occupying the offensive tackle, and you have hang players out there in that space vacated. Like, you should be able to make those plays. And one of those guys was Nelson Caesar, and he was obviously not there. But you have bodies there that should be making plays, and they were unable to. So you gave up the edges. Cool. You then also, over the course of the game, got run over and looked like somewhat tired out by the size and speed of the Kansas State offensive line and started giving up the inside stuff too. Kansas State got to run the ball wherever they wanted, and I'm not so convinced that if they didn't want to pick a score, they couldn't have just said, hey, we want to score 52 today and found a way to get to 52. Now, I said all that, and I said the thing I was worried about coming into the game was schematically, as I like to talk about. I thought what Kansas State was doing with two quarterbacks and the two-quarterback system was challenging because of how different the two skill sets were. I mean, Will Howard was 12 of 12 to start the game today. He ended up like 15 of 17 on the day. He had that with the like fire and thunder and lightning or whatever with he and Avery Johnson. They didn't have to ever go to Avery Johnson. They did because they wanted to. They didn't ever have to go to him in the course of this game, which I think ultimately means that like they never felt like they had to play that card on the table, which is interesting as well. The ultimate like could have shifted momentum in this game, could have stolen some of that energy and maybe helped the like at least look passable as a football team. In the first, I think it was first drive of the football game. Someone commented as well. I think first drive of the football game. Houston gets to a 3rd and 15. It looks like they're going to get off the football field. Kansas State's not known for big pass plays. This is, momentum should be swinging back Houston's way to open up the game. And it was the first drive, so you get the ball back on the first drive. You can potentially go score the first touchdown. And instead, they give up a 23-yard pass. Now, I'm not saying there's a whole lot of film, frankly, on Kansas State throwing 3rd and 15 type pass plays because they don't get there very often. I'm not saying that there's a whole lot of scouting to have been done, but they don't get there very often, and they're also not very good at the downfield stuff. So that was a really big backbreaker. They would give up other big plays in the course of the game. I don't mean to say that they weren't ever going to do that, but it was really, really porous for a defense that, frankly, they never took anything away. They never took anything away that Kansas State tried to do. On Monday's episode, we'll talk more as far as exactly, this many percentage of the yardage came off this, they ran behind this guy or those kind of things. But right now, all we know is that with the basic stats and the basic things in front of us and having watched the football game, I don't know what you could say the defense did particularly well. I mean, I guess they don't have a ton of missed tackles, but they weren't 100% there either, right? Like there was a lot of flaws in this defense. And we've seen Houston Cougars win bad defensive games in the last few years, certainly in the Dana Holgorsen era, although he is barely over 500 these days after another rough season so far. But what we have not seen is, unfortunately, them also not score. And that back and forth was pretty painful. I don't necessarily know what I could argue they did well on offense. I will say I don't know why they went away from mesh and crossers. Maybe it had to do with time to throw, but mesh and crossers, all those kinds of things over the middle were just not in the playbook because Joseph Manjack wasn't there. That doesn't seem right. Bogey Johnson had a scary hit at the one point in the game, but I would have thought if we're going to use him and Dalton Carnes to replace Joseph Manjack, we might have seen more of their speed on display. We didn't really get to see that over the course of the game. Now, we got one commenter asking, can Houston beat Baylor? And before I segue into basketball for the third and final segment, and I'm not done with football, I guess. We'll talk, obviously, about this on Monday and Tuesday and so on, but the Big 12 did have an interesting day. Baylor lost to Iowa State, and Baylor, frankly, I guess they lost. It looks like the final score was 12, but that game was not a 12-point game. That game did end up being a 12-point game, I should say. Did not feel like a 12-point game by any stretch. Baylor and Houston Baylor is by far the worst incumbent team in the conference. So Houston's got a real shot in that one next week. It's on ESPN Plus. We've been demoted to ESPN Plus, but you can find that next week. I believe it's at was it 2:30 I saw somewhere? Anyway, ESPN Plus next week. West Virginia beat the brakes off Central Florida. Oklahoma State beating presently Cincinnati. Obviously, we lost our game, and Texas with their backup quarterback beat BYU. So the new schools had a rough go of it, to say the least. Somewhat predictable. I will say, like Houston hung tighter with Texas, right? Houston beat West Virginia. So you could argue they're having like a slightly better than the other new schools kind of week. But the game of the week in the Big 12 is going to end up coming down to Kansas beating Oklahoma. You could theoretically, if Kansas State beats Texas next week, somehow finagle your way into after tiebreakers and things like that, weirdly get to a Kansas versus Kansas State Big 12 title game, which would drive those soon-to-be Southeastern folks nuts. That would make me a little happy in a year that Houston football has done very little to do that. Last bow on the football game and things I'm going to continue to investigate as we get towards Monday's episode on football and recapping the game with more stats in front of us are where exactly were breakdowns in pass protection. That felt like to me live, like he had time to throw, but the guys weren't open, creating separation. And so thus he got hit in the backfield. Donovan Smith got hit in the backfield a lot. If the time to throw was lower than I felt like it was live, maybe that's not the case. We'll see. Things I also want to see are it felt like I said, Kansas State could run the ball wherever they wanted to, however they wanted to. I assume that's going to be the case when I check the analytics as far as what lineman got run behind the most and those kinds of things on for Monday's episode. But if not, you got to stop something, man. You got to find the defense, stop something, put something in the hole. Last but not least, and we may investigate this week, I have a lot of people commenting on this or on Twitter about when is enough. This is abysmal. I think the interesting thing is we're all sitting around saying if you lost Kansas State, it wouldn't be in the deal. But is being unable to motivate and energize and get ready to play against Kansas State and being down 41-0 or losing 41-0 a fireable offense. I told you on an episode earlier this year, I don't think it happens this offseason. I think he's here for another year. Thought I laid out some decent reasons why. You can go check that out back in the catalog. I will say that there have been moments this season where we did not look, even as someone who was as like even keeled I thought in the season as I was, did not look ready to go. Saturday, October 28th, 11 a.m., the Little Apple, Manhattan, Kansas. Houston flat out was not ready to go. And at some point, that's the job, right? Rough go over. Now I want to switch to talk about a team that won today, the team that looked good, to say the least. And I think it's worth pointing out that, I don't know. I think that the basketball team is going to be really good this year. But anyway, before we get too far along, we got to make sure we talk about our buddies at PrizePicks, because PrizePicks is the #1 daily fantasy sports app. You can go on there and win yourself. You can say, screw this Cougar thing, and go win all the stuff you want to all football season long. You can win up to 25 times your money back. You can test your skills and knowledge by just going over and under various stats and prop bets and things like that. The cool thing about PrizePicks, and the thing that makes them the #1 daily fantasy sports book, is that they have this PrizePicks reboot policy where your entries will stay in play even if one of your players gets injured NFL and college football games, if you have a player exit the game in the first half and does not return, what if your players never show up in the whole game at all? They just don't show up. Not the same thing. Okay, cool. But if your players get hurt in the first half and don't show up in the second half, your player gets rebooted, and PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports app with that kind of injury insurance. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code lockedoncollege for our first deposit match up to $100. It's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. prizepicks.com. All right. I do want to transition to talk about the basketball game because part of the reason I'm going late today is because it's Cougars at dark. We're not going to go before dark, but also I want a chance to, once we put my 4.5-month-old down, that kind of stuff, to actually watch the second half of the basketball game. Houston, if you were too caught up in the football game or just not in a good mood enough, didn't want to watch sports afterwards, Houston had an exhibition matchup with UNC Pembroke at the Fertitta Center on Saturday. I believe tip-off at 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock? Yeah, 3 o'clock. So it started shortly after the football game was over. UNC Pembroke you'll recognize because that's where Coach Kelvin Sampson went to school, met his wife. He talks a lot about that region and part of the world and how that ties to his life. Kind of a cool moment for him to get to put that program on the national stage that he's got in Houston too. I know he spoke in the postgame about how like that was a cool thing and an important thing because that school represents so much to that community. In this game, Houston started with, since Damian Dunn's still hurt, they started with Jamal Shedd, LJ Cryer, Emmanuel Sharp, Jawan Roberts, and Javier Francis. LJ Cryer led the way with 21 points. He can, if you're tuning into Houston for the first time, didn't watch Baylor at all last year, he can really stinking shoot. What stuck out to me about watching him shoot was he makes difficult shots look easy, like catching and shooting really quickly without a whole lot of time spent. Really, really quick release and the same crisp release even when it's sped up and quick. I also thought watching the starters move around that Emmanuel Sharp is moving very, very well. You remember in his senior year of high school, he's a class 2022 kid, but in his senior year of high school, he had a crazy bad leg break, leg injury, lower leg injury. So he actually transferred or graduated high school early and came to Houston as a air quotes redshirt freshman in what would have been a senior year of high school. Last year was his redshirt freshman year, but really his true freshman year. And he was still frankly, he came in the season a little bit heavier than he probably needed to. And he was still moving around and kind of getting in shape over the course of the season because he was less than a year removed from that crazy bad leg injury. Totally understandable. I think he looks like he's moving really, really well right now. He's one of Houston's key shooters. He's going to play a big role this season. I don't know if he'll start when Damian Dunn is back. I don't know how they'll start. All the guards they've got. They got a lot of backcourt talent, man, a lot of backcourt talent. But Sharp plays an important role in this team that's really important to see moving forward. I like Javier Francis at the 4. I think Javier Francis at the 4. So the way I put this in my notes here is he sees the floor and passes like a talented power forward, right? Sees and passes like a 4 does. Some of his offensive skill sets outside of that, though, very much still feel like a center. And so finding that balance of how much he plays at the two different positions will be important. But obviously, with Javier Francis, Jawan Roberts ends up playing a lot more of that 4 spot. And that's going to be, I think, important down the line, how much they get to play back and forth. Now, the guy that comes in when they're trying to change that is the freshman JoJo Tugler. And I'm telling you, this dude is the real stinking deal. I don't know if he's quite a one-and-done freshman like Jarris Walker was, and frankly, that could be better for Houston in the long run. But JoJo Tugler was built in a lab to play for Kelvin Sampson. 6'8" and change, 6'9", crazy long arms, incredibly high motor. In 19 minutes, he had 13 points, 9 rebounds, and 4 blocks. That's the second highest point mark on the game, though, for Houston in just 19 minutes. Both of the other freshmen that suited up got less than 5 minutes. Frankly, they got 7 minutes combined. Second most points of the team for JoJo Tugler. He was also the first sub in off the bench. He's going to be an important key part of this basketball team. He's a Houston area kid too, so you got to love that. The inbounds alley-oop pass was sweet. It was really, really fun play. Again, that's the kind of energy, motor, length, athleticism. Insert your cliche word to describe how crazy gifted this kid is. That's the kind of play we're talking about here. That's the kind of athlete we're talking about here. He's going to be a ton of fun. Another high flyer I think is going to be really important. I think these two guys are both going to be really important actually to his team, and they both came off the bench in this game because of how crazy deep the Houston Cougars are at guard. But Malik Wilson and Terrence Arsenault got 20 and 19 minutes respectively. But when they're on the floor, the length those two guys play with, the athleticism that Malik brings, the toughness that Terrence brings, that's a really good defensive backcourt duo. Terrence had 3 rebounds, 2 steals, and 7 points. Malik had 7 rebounds, steal, and 2 blocks. They're all over the floor doing all kinds of things. Malik was redshirted last year. Terrence was a freshman, but played very much freshman minutes for Kelvin last year. So it's going to be kind of a new look when they bring those guys off the bench to play defense together. But it adds a different dimension because Jamal and LJ are tremendous. And Jamal is one of the best point guards in America, if not the best point guard in America, right? Plays 6'1". LJ Cryer is incredible scorer, incredible shooter. I think he's also listed like 6'1", 6'2", right? It looks very much about the same size and height as Jamal out there. Adding Malik Wilson, Terrence Arsenault adds height, length, it adds a dimension to this team that was kind of missing in the backcourt a year ago with Marcus and Jamal, and even Tremont to some extent, right? On that note, Tremont, he had some big shot tonight for Arkansas, but I'm excited because it felt like the guy that got squeezed out of minutes last year was Ramon. And Ramon was back and doing Ramon Walker things, diving on the floor, popping the ball out of bounds off people, all kinds of fun stuff there. Good to see him back. I know he went through a lot when he got kind of pushed to the side last year. It was good to have him back on the floor doing Ramon Walker things. Team has 2 first-round picks next year's NBA draft. Team did. Last year, Jarris Walker went 8th overall. Marcus Sasser went 25th overall. I don't know that this team has that kind of depth. What I do think it looks like is like this team has college level depth, like at the guard spots as well, much as anyone in the country. I said that poorly, but what I will say, this is a live show, so that's the way it goes. Not having the 2 like soon to be NBA guys may come back and haunt you, but having so much reliable guard depth will be really, really important come March, because in March, guards steer the show. I know that UConn won last year and they had their bigs, whatever, but look at the key shots are coming from guys that are playing on the perimeter. Guards dominate in March. Houston's got a lot of guards to play all kinds of fast, high speed, high tempo Houston Cougar basketball for Kelvin Sampson. And their bigs, frankly, have those kinds of moves. We mentioned Tugler. We've seen Roberts. We've seen Francis. Francis added some to his game, too. I thought he looked very, very comfortable out there. I was frankly kind of happy to see, and this is me going back to the starters. When Francis starts, I get worried. And when Francis plays, I get worried he's going to get in foul trouble. His fouls per minute last year was not a great ratio. That he was able to keep a clean sheet is what I have written down in my notes. But he had a clean sheet in the game and was able to play with his feet and not his hands and get hands on shots instead of on bodies. It was all really, really tremendous. My one hesitation on this basketball team, and my one thing I think they've got to find ways to improve on or find ways to play around. Houston was 10 of 25 from deep. LJ Cryer was 5 of 11 from deep. Sharp was 2 of 5. That's not a whole lot of great shooting outside those 2 from beyond the arc. And the 3-ball continues to be more and more important in basketball every single year. I worry, kind of like last year, I worry that the team's overall depth, because they only played 6 guys really. I worry that in this year's team, they got a ton of guards. They feel deep. Is shooting from deep specifically, going to come back to haunt you? Because last year, Marcus and Tremont did their thing. And frankly, Jarris could stretch the floor as the 4, right? This year, I worry that not having really that many, I'll say pure shooters on the team, that many guys that that's what they do. They got guys that can get hot. Jamal can get hot, right? Terrence can get hot. But they got LJ and Emmanuel. And then the shooting, from what I can tell, unless someone adds into their game we haven't seen yet, drops off a lot. So can we figure something out there? Can we figure out some way to build on that or win without that? That'll be interesting to see this season. We'll be following them all season long, as well as the rest of football season, as I see some of you sighing right now. Every day here, Locked On Cougs. So thank you all so much for tuning in tonight to the live edition of Cougars After Dark, or if you've got in your audio feed sometime on Sunday, whenever they get put up on that as well. Thank you all again so much. So much Houston Cougar post-game content across all of the interwebs. Frankly, I enjoy it too. Go enjoy everybody's post-game stuff. But thank you for making us a part of your post-game menu. Locked On Cougs is a primary Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team, yes, the football team too, every single day. Go Cougs.